And we're back! Greetings everyone, this is Lucian Vâlsan broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, alongside with me is Herr Jon Gunnarsson broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer making sure everything works just fine, lurking in the background, broadcasting from the States. Greetings, gentlemen!
Good evening. How's it going?
It's going just fine. The weather has finally started to resemble something livable after almost 25 days of since the beginning of the year, basically, of temperatures going minus 10 or lower, minus 10 Celsius.
Yeah, we've had a couple of minus 10 days here too, and I think it's actually at mine it's actually gotten worse this week. So I don't know.
Yeah, maybe the mass of polar air that has been lurking over Eastern Europe since December 31st, basically, have finally started moving westwards.
Yeah,
Uh,
maybe that's the case.
Although it has to be somewhat tamed by now after raping us with extreme temperatures for so many days. I mean, remember the minus 10 ones were the worm days. Your average days since the beginning of the current year were
So
of
now we
minus.
now we just get a flaccid minus 10.
Yeah. The minus 10 is the worm side of of the of what we enjoyed since the beginning of this month and this year. Amazing. But yeah, today it's been remarkably warm. It went as hot as +3 Celsius. Fantastic.
Wow.
And no wind, so you could almost go to the beach. Well, not really, but it's still far more tolerable. I mean, I didn't have to put in 3 jackets over me in order to have the courage to go outside. I only needed 1 jacket, so that was
Yeah.
fantastic.
Meanwhile, I've taken to wearing 2 pairs of socks.
That's annoying when that happens, isn't it? I needed that on January the 2nd. There were minus 37 degrees. For fucking sake, it was All right. So we have a much shorter, much more manageable news section, which means we get to comment a lot more on the news that we read. So without further ado, let's go to the first one, which is somewhat older, but I think it kind of does make the point. It's an analysis printed by the Spiked magazine, written by a fine lady. Gender quotas are an insult to women. Gender quotas have been a favorite talking point of mainstream political parties for a while now. Many parties have special groups or mentoring programs to encourage more women to get into politics. The Labour Party has its all women shortlist. The Tories have a campaign called Women to Win. Two as in the number two. But according to the Women and Equality Select Committee, these schemes don't cut it. In a report released yesterday, the WEC demanded that the government introduce legislation that would penalize parties that did not have 45% female MPs by 2030. Only 30% of MPs are women, and the UK ranks only 48th globally for representation in the lower or single legislative chamber, says the report. Many, including party leaders, support the suggested legislation. The WAC says it has spoken to leading members of the parties, and there is general agreement that implementing new legislation to pressure parties to dramatically change their number of female MPs is a good idea. The Women's Equality Party, Sondi Toksvig's quasi-feminist girls club, likes the idea too, and has some plans of its own for scolding the sexists in parliament. The Women's Equality Party has a plan to put Parliament into special measures for 2 elections, said party leader Sophie Walker. It is a simple and effective plan that will see parity achieved within 2 elections and 10 years. Parity in 10 years? Thrilling stuff. Others want the political class to go further. In an interview on BBC Radio 4's Women's Hour, Professor Sarah Childs, a supporter of the WAC's plans, said the parties should focus on quotas plus, meaning that alongside quotas for female MPs, parties should also, quote, invite women in and make sure they're properly trained and mentored, and yes, make sure that all parties are attractive to women, close quote. So not only do women need to be given a leg up, they also have to be specially coached and taught how to negotiate life in the political arena. Because we're a bit silly and scared. This is a far more sexist notion than anything coming from the supposed boys' club of mainstream politics, or from the mysterious mood, as Women's Hour presenter Jane Garvey called it, that is apparently stopping women from feeling welcome in politics. The attempt to force parties to be nicer to women and train them and push them to the front means women being judged and elevated entirely according to their gender rather than their ideas and ability. In Britain, there is no gender barrier to getting a job in politics. Discrimination on the basis of gender is illegal. Any woman can aspire, if she so wishes, to work in the political arena. So, what's making many women decide not to bother? Maybe they can't abide the prospect of working for one of the lackluster parties. Or it could be the problem of the work family split that many women have to deal with. On Women's Hour, the Tory MP Flick Drummond acknowledged this issue, but instead of arguing for better childcare facilities, she waxed lyrical about the importance of mentors. Women are always presumed to be suffering from self esteem issues rather than from set and practical fixable problems. More importantly, why obsess over equal representation in parliament at all? The idea that women need to see other women in parliament in order to feel engaged and valued is just insulting. So, too, is the idea that increasing the number of women in parliament will make politics better somehow, as if all women have set and consensual qualities that erases women's individuality and their ideologies. Women MPs often aren't good for women, in fact. Female MPs has refused to back liberal changes to the abortion law and are supportive of state intervention into family life and in the world of parenting, much of which falls to women in the early years. Female MPs are often no better for women than male ones. These new proposals are an insult to free-thinking women. The WEC is presenting women as less capable than men, and its supporters are complicit in this portrayal of women as weak, feeble, lacking aspiration, and needing encouragement. The best way to encourage women to get into politics is to make politics more interesting, not just for women, but for everyone. The WEP talks about a dearth of women in politics, but the real dearth is in ideas. In the end, parties can apply all the lipstick they want, but without big ideas for how to make life better and freer for women and men, they're not going to attract more women.
Excellent piece.
Almost excellent. Yeah, there are a few things that I would quite object to. For instance, this part that, instead of arguing for better childcare, she waxed lyrical. Yeah, the Tory representative is foolish for waxing lyrical about the importance of mentors. But I also don't think that arguing for better childcare is a good idea to begin with, especially considering that in the implication of this article is that that would mean the state would have to pay for
Yeah.
it. Uh, and the reason, probably this is because I went to a state-funded childcare facility when I was a child myself. I went there for, I think it was either 3 weeks or a month and 3 weeks. I'll have to ask my mom again. Basically, by the time my mother had time to actually visit the facility herself and decided the same day, no, I'm not letting my child another day here. This is insane. The reason is, of course, because it was run by the government, therefore it was run poorly. Thank you, commies. The thing is that once the state is paying for it, is either crap or very expensive for the taxpayer. In both cases, I don't think it's a good idea. So that's why I'm not a big fan of state-paid childcare or arguing for better childcare thingy. Yeah, no. Another aspect, Britain ranks 48th, where is it? Globally in representation in the lower singles legislative chamber. Yeah, well, Rwanda ranks first. Just saying. I mean, yeah, so, I mean, so what if it's 48th? Bosnia ranks fourth or fifth. I don't remember exactly. But anyway, very in top five for sure. Ranking first or 50th globally for quote unquote representation, that is to say, how many women you have in your parliament, it's not really that much of a relevance. I'm actually in the process of writing a column that would appear on AVFM called Get a Bloody Perspective. That's my working title now. Probably I'll have to tone down the language a little bit. But basically, and I'm comparing these kinds of statistics, for instance, and I'm comparing mostly with Romania, not with Germany or Britain. And the reason I do this is I want to drive the point that even one of the quote-unquote poor countries of Europe are actually significantly more attractive than 90% of the planet, which is true. And for instance, the feminists here whine that only I think it's 15% or 16% of the Romanian parliament are women, and I'm like, yeah, well, in Afghanistan is more. Yet Afghani women want to live here, not in Afghanistan. Just saying. I mean, these kinds of statistics, how where you rank globally in quote unquote gender equality or gender representation in parliament, I'm just, yeah, who cares? It's the kind of statistical fact that it just doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's also not going to improve the lives of ordinary women if more women are in politics, because just because someone is a woman doesn't mean that she's going to implement policies that are good for women. Uh, and I mean, it's not like it's obvious which policies are good or bad for women, because there's a lot of because politics is really complicated. There's lots of things, lots of economics, lots of sociology, lots of all sorts of different things you have to understand to actually determine whether a particular policy is good or bad for women. And so
And it's also ideology, worldview. Not all women have the same worldview, for crying out loud.
yeah, exactly. And just because someone is a woman, and even just because someone wants to help women, doesn't mean they're actually going to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Take, for instance, abortion, which is a women specific policy. Most women actually don't think abortion is a good idea. Women are far more pro life than men. This is true in every single
I
country in
don't know
Europe.
about far more. I think it's like slightly more.
Well, it depends. It depends. In some countries, in Britain, it's slightly more. In Italy, is far more. So it depends on the country. But nevertheless, there are more women who are pro-life than men. Yet, so not even women can agree on on something that is precisely uh, almost exclusively their business. Cannot agree on what the right policy is. So this idea that you just have more women there, you're gonna have more pro women policies. Yeah, I don't know. Feminists still hate Margaret Thatcher. Just saying. Ah.
Yeah.
Also, also I do have to remember that back in communism we had mandatory 50% women in the National Assembly. That was the name of the parliament at that time, like in France. Imagine that. And uh, I would dare to argue that the overwhelming majority of women would rather live now, when only 13% of the parliament is female, than the times when it was 50%. Just saying.
Yeah. Also, it's just it's not in and of itself good to have more women in parliament. It's just the question isn't how many women do we have. It's the question is it's a matter of procedural justice, of how is the procedure to get into parliament. As long as the rules are fair, and as long as there's not any sort of unfair advantages that men have, then it's not a bad thing if women are quote unquote underrepresented.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep. There was another aspect that I kind of underlined here, but I just kind of oh yeah, this expression, the prospect of working for one of the lackluster parties. That was a bit funny. On the other hand, the overall conclusion of the article is debatable. I mean, well, if they just have to make parties more interesting, and unless they do that, they're not going to attract more women. Yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah,
Interesting.
that seems like a really poor argument. Like if you make parties in general more attractive, how do you know that this is going to increase the number of women? It's probably just going to increase the number of people in general who are interested in joining these parties and becoming or running for office. Um, Probably it's not going to do much about the ratio of men and women running for office. So I don't see that as a solution to the perceived problem.
Mhm. Not only that, but what is attractive? What is interesting? Uh, everyone has his or her own definition of interesting, and as you said, that may not help the ratio. If you make a party, political party, somehow more attractive for whatever reason, you might still end up with 70% of the new members being men and 30% of the new members being women, and the ratio still stays the same. The party becomes bigger, but not necessarily more quote unquote gender balanced, as they like to put it.
Also, if you permit me of making that point, I don't necessarily want the parties to become more attractive or politics to become more attractive. I just don't think that it's necessarily a good thing that if lots of people are interested in politics and devote their lives to politics, I think there's other ways you can make a lot more change and do a lot more positive things for humanity than engaging in politics.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, I always like to ask, who the hell is going to work if everyone's doing politics? And yes, of course, I mean, there are many things that can and indeed are being done, can be done and indeed are being done through the market. I mean, at the end of the day, there are even historical examples, such as Rockefeller in the United States. The people who would go to the United States in the 19th century, they thought Rockefeller is the king of the United States. They had no idea who the president was because politics was just not important. What was important was the shekels from the oil industry. And even today, I mean,
and Rockefeller certainly did a lot more to improve the standard of living of the average American than any of the presidents during his lifetime.
for sure, and not just for the average American, for Europeans too. Um, because at the end of the day, most of his techniques ended up being used worldwide and fundamentally changed the world. Even though he never held a political office, he also improved education. I mean, he financed universities, schools, all over, all sorts of things. Um, a similar example, Ignacy Vukatsievich in Western Ukraine. I mean, every single school in Western Ukraine was built in the 19th century, in the early 20th century. Almost all of them were somehow connected to his petrol money, uh, because he loved building stuff in his home area, his home province, and he did. And as a result, he's much better remembered than any single governor of that province.
Yep.
All right. Yeah. Other than that, I don't know what to say. I would still be interested to read how would the penalizing of the parties would work, because how would they balance the democratic principle, that is to say, anyone can run and anyone can build a political party and whatnot. How would they compensate? How would they balance that against the penalization that you don't have um, enough women in the party? I mean,
Also, the problem with MPs is that they are not decided on by the parties, but they are elected in their constituencies, and it's not so easy. You can't just decide that 45% plus of our candidates are going to win in these constituencies. It's not possible to really plan that before the election.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if I have let's say Justice for Men and Boys, our favorite political party in the United Kingdom, next election they hope to field 20 candidates. Let's say they have 17 women and 3 men. It is still entirely possible that only the 3 men would win, and as a result, they would have 100% of their MPs to be men, even though they didn't have a majority male candidates. So yeah, because again, Britain has this first past the post system, which whatever your opinion might be of it, it is what it is. So yeah, how do you plan that before? Maybe big parties could, because big parties have these so-called safe seats, and they could, I don't know, field somehow the candidates somewhat that they could reach. Maybe not 45%, but 30 or 35%. But then again, 30, they already have it now. So well, I don't know what would be the improvement.
Yeah.
The only way they could fulfill this would be to, for instance, let's say you're the Conservative Party. Okay, how many seats do we have safe seats? Do we have, let's say, 100 or 150? All right, we'll field 150 women in all the safe seats, and then
Yeah,
ask
yeah,
the
you have to
men.
do something like that. Yeah, you actually have to like massively discriminate against men in order to ensure that you get this 45%.
Yeah, that would be the only way, and it could only work with big parties such as the Labour Party and the Conservative
Yeah.
Party. With UKIP, for instance, has maybe one or two safe seats, and
I don't think they have any safe seats.
safe seats, yes.
Yeah, I think they have 0 safe seats.
Well, yeah, they probably have one because that guy who won now will probably win again because the people really like him. But nevertheless, okay, 0 or 1. But what if UKIP wins 10 seats next elections? How would they know where they would win it beforehand? They
Yep.
could speculate, of course, because they're on the front line of the campaign, but you cannot really know until the results are in.
Yep.
No. Amazing. So I would really like to at least to read the policy and then obviously mark it, but but nevertheless, also the Women and Equalities Committee is the place where our guy, Mr. Philip Davis, is in. So I'm looking forward for some statements and criticism published by him. I'm pretty sure it's going to be glorious. All right, let's go to the next one.
Okay, the next one is from Germany, from Tagesspiegel.de. Federal government and states agree on rates hike. What happens if your ex-partner pays no or pays too little child support? Then the state steps in. But Minister for Families Schwiesig believes that the government's aid doesn't go far enough. After a long back and forth, the federal government, the states, and the municipalities have agreed on a budget for increasing the governmental advance on child support for single parents. As Federal Minister for Families Manuela Schwesig of the SPD explained in Berlin on Monday, the age limit up to which the state covers child support if the partner doesn't pay enough is to be increased from 12 to 18 years, as planned. Moreover, the time limit of 6 years is to be removed. The rates are to be between 152 and 268 euros per month. 40% of the increase is to be paid for by the federal government and the other 60% by the states. Hitherto, the ratio had been 1/3 to 2/3. This reform was originally supposed to go into effect on January the 1st. Now will go into effect on July the 1st. The costs are estimated at 350 million euros. Currently, about 440,000 children receive the advance on child support, since not everyone who can claims it. The ministry estimates that in the future, 260,000 additional children will have a claim to an advance on child support. The Union of German Cities and Municipalities, on the other hand, believes there will be 400,000 additional children. And I'm skipping the last two paragraphs. So, for those who are not aware, Germany has a sort of system where if you have to pay child support, but you have a low income, there's a certain like minimum amount you get to keep, and so if the fathers, usually the father doesn't have the income to pay child support, the government steps in, but up to this point, it's only with children under 12 and also only for 6 years. But now they're basically lifting these restrictions and sort of paying out more money in these cases.
Yeah, well, if it is true that the total cost is 350 million euros, I presume,
Yep.
per year. Uh, well, considering that the eco-Marxist green energy pointless retarded effort costs 1.9 billion euros was the last estimation, it doesn't seem like such a huge surge in expenses. When put into that perspective, I could be wrong, so please do correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it's also many of the people who are eligible for that are also on public assistance, and the money they would get from this sort of gets weighed up against what they would receive from public assistance, so they don't actually get more money in a lot of cases.
Mhm.
Um, so in those cases, it doesn't actually make a difference. Um, so it's and as you all said, not all people who actually are entitled to this assistance actually claim it. So that's, I guess, why the estimated cost is not all that high.
Yeah, it doesn't. From an economic standpoint, it's just not a lot of money. It's just not. From a moral standpoint, I don't know. I mean, uh, at the end of the day, there are trade-offs. I mean, there, on one hand, there is the American trade-off where you have debtors' prisons, which I think is insane. On the other hand, you would have the other extreme trade-off where no assistance is available, which would be my preference, but that's usually politically unassailable. So I guess this one is the better trade-off between my preference and the American extreme example.
Yeah, I also think this is more reasonable than the American model. Um, yeah, I'm not sure if it's a good thing that they are increasing those rates, but
Yeah, I'm
I
also
prefer
not
them not to do that. But whatever.
Yeah, I'm not particularly thrilled with this increase till 18 years of age. I mean, but then again, I probably have a biased perspective. I mean, I started working when I was 12, and by
Literally
modern,
child labor.
yeah, literally child labor. Thank goodness for the illegal capitalist that gave me a job when I was 12. Seriously, I'm not joking. I'm very, very happy to have done what I did when I was 12. And it taught me some valuable lessons. By the time I properly entered the labor force, I was already far more experienced than even people older than myself. And that was great. Uh, I think that there should be a way to balance the uh, moral imperative to prevent child labor, as in children working in coal mines, but then also against this entitlement culture where people start actually working when they're 23 or something. I think starting working at least a little bit from the age of 14, 15, it's not really such a bad idea. Just saying.
Yeah, and the idea that is a moral outrage if, say, a 12-year-old works part-time as some sort of shop assistant or something. It's just crazy that this is supposed to be some sort of form of evil child exploitation.
Yeah, we had that a British this is a fun story. A British tabloid, I think it was the Sun, but I could be wrong, it could have been the Daily Mail, but I think it was the Sun, came to Romania because they learned that there is a family somewhere in the northwest that has subcontracted some manufacturing from Kinder, you know, Kinder, and they learned that this it is possible that one of their children might also work like 5 hours per week or something to help them fulfill that contract. And so they went there, and lo and behold, the child was indeed working with their parents. It wasn't 5 hours a week; it was 7 hours a week. Can you imagine the horror? And the child was like, I don't know, 10, 11. And the kind of work was something that, you know, the child wouldn't even perceive as work because it was fun to assemble toys and things and then disassemble them and put them in. It was fun. And yeah, they tried to create a moral outrage. The problem is that they were in the wrong country, because here everyone was like, yeah, we do that all the time, so what? I mean, really. Instead of, you know, washing the dishes or doing other house chores, you unpack toys. uh, can you imagine the oppression? Yeah, we can't. Buzz off. But seriously, you know, I was selling newspapers on the street, actually, so a lot more dangerous than what that kid was doing. When I was 12, I was selling newspapers on the street, and I would go at the gate of the factory. There was a big factory in my hometown who used to manufacture. I mean, they do still manufacture. The factory still exists. I want to remember. I don't remember the word in English or what they manufacture. Bearings. Yeah, so I would go there and and try to sell newspapers to the workers, and the workers were very happy because during the that was the time when there was no mass internet, no smartphones, and all of that. So, you know, reading the news in the lunch break was a very, very common pastime, and reading the physical newspaper was the only way. So, and I didn't perceive it as oppressive. In fact, I was very thrilled that when I was 12, 13, I would already have my own money and I would be a bit independent. I would necessarily have to demand every single small thing from my parents. That was fantastic. So in that particular thing, it would be a better idea. I don't know. I don't know. Give the children of single parents, give them some tax incentives. For instance, I don't know, spare them of taxes until the age of 16 or whatever, if they work. So give some incentives for them to do some menial work. I don't think that's necessarily evil to do. I think that's great.
Yeah, the problem though with that proposal is that people who are single parents and have a partner who doesn't make enough money to be able to pay child support, they're usually on welfare or just making very low wages that they don't really pay in taxes anyway. So tax breaks for that kind of group are not going to do much.
Fair enough. Fair enough. No, I'm saying tax breaks to the child. I don't know how it is in Germany, but I think the most extreme example is in Finland, where no child is spared taxes. So if I give to a Finnish child a gift, a present that is worth more than 100 euros, the kid owes taxes to the government. It's a donation tax. I'm not joking.
Wow.
I'm not joking. So I don't know how it is in Germany. I presume it's not that insane as in
No,
Finland.
in Germany, if you have a job that is something like below, I think 800 euros per month or something like that, you don't pay any sort of income tax. I mean, you do pay some tax for not like taxes, but like
The so-called social
contributions to
contributions. Yeah,
social securities, that sort of stuff, but not any income tax.
I see. Yeah. Well, I perceive all of them as onerous taxes, and I do everything I can to avoid them. So to me, they're all taxes. They're all theft. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. There could be ways. For instance, in this country, there is a special program that encourages employers to hire not 12-year-olds. That's still illegal. It shouldn't be, but anyway, 15 to 18-year-olds. And they're also spared not just income taxes, but also a lot of other contributions and whatever till they turn 18. I think that sort of thing is very reasonable to do.
Yep.
So basically, what I was saying with the tax cuts proposal is encourage the child, not the parent. Because if you're unfortunate enough to grow up in a single parent household, at the very least you could work and then, I don't know, get some of the discipline and values necessary from the labor force if the family cannot entirely provide that, because that's the problem with single parents. So most of the values that we would expect aren't particularly well transmitted in a single parent household.
Yep.
All right, enough radicalism with this one. Let's go to the next one.
Okay, the next one is from Synex, also from Germany, and it's an article about a study. Are girls not better at reading than boys after all? Girls are better at reading than boys. This cliché is supported time and time again by PISA and other standardized tests in school. But maybe this gender difference is only due to test design. This is what two Norwegian researchers argue. They believe that the tested tasks are more agreeable to girls and that differences in motivation might also play a role. Reading is a fundamental ability. Even children in kindergarten are capable of distinguishing between mere pictures and written words. But it takes a multi-year process for them to master reading, and this process is difficult for some. PISA and other studies on pupils' abilities have repeatedly shown girls to have a lead when it comes to reading. In almost all countries, they outperform their male peers on reading tests. This difference is already visible at age 10 and becomes more pronounced among 15-year-olds. Looking at older age groups, though, the sex-specific differences in competency suddenly vanish. How can supposedly worse readers catch up so suddenly? Odne Judith Solheim and Kjerstin Lundetre of Stavanger University in Norway believe that differences measured in tests are at least partly due to the test design, and that boys are not necessarily worse at reading. To test the hypothesis, the researchers compared the design of two tests for pupils, PILRS for 5th grade and PISA for 10th grade, with the PIAC test, which measures adults' competency. All these tests define reading competency as the ability to understand and to make use of written texts. Beyond this, PISA and PIAAC also measure whether the participants are capable of independently thinking about and assessing what they read. How this competency is measured differs significantly between these tests. Quote, it seems that PISA and PILS, the tests administered in school, are designed in such a way that the girls have an edge. The PIAAC test, on the other hand, is designed differently. This might be an explanation for why these sex differences in school results exist, Solheim said. One of the reasons the researchers give for why girls do better on school tests is the kinds of texts used in PISA and the PILS uses mostly long and often fictional texts. That's exactly the kinds of texts that girls are probably better at reading than boys, the teams say. Males, on the other hand, are better at dealing with shorter non-fiction texts, such as advertisements and labeled graphs. And indeed, the PIAC test uses a balanced mix of long and short fiction and non-fiction texts, and thus the measured difference in the competency vanishes. Another important point is that while adults show no difference in reading competency, several international studies show a difference when it comes to writing, with women having an edge. Quote, over the last few years, pupils were increasingly asked to write down answers the answers to the text they had read themselves rather than merely having to check the answer, the researchers report. For example, the PISA test now contains 65% of questions where test takers have to write their own answers, which seems to benefit girls. Several studies show that gender-specific differences are greater for questions where an answer seems to be written than for multiple-choice questions, and that boys are more likely to simply skip the former type of question. This might not be solely due to differences in writing talent, but also due to another gender-specific trait, motivation. Could girls just seem to be better at reading because their male peers lack the motivation to apply themselves to the tests? The researchers believe so. We do indeed know that it is more difficult to make boys excited about text than girls. Another point is that girls are more likely to do what they are told, whereas boys are more likely to ask what the point of a task is. And I'm skipping the last two paragraphs because the article is bloody long.
That sounds like a very legitimate reason to skip paragraphs. Now, admittedly, the name of the second researcher is particularly difficult to pronounce. Is Kjersti Lundete. See, even even I, as a Norwegian speaker, I still have trouble pronouncing it. It's particularly difficult to pronounce. Now, on to the results. My first question is, why does it bloody matter? I mean, they say themselves that somewhere along the way, boys do catch up, and eventually into adulthood, there's not really a difference. So why go ahead, please.
I think it's quite important that because reading is sort of the basic task that you need for everything else in education, more or less. If you're not able to read and understand text as well as other people, then you're also going to struggle in picking up foreign languages. You're going to struggle in history. You're going to struggle in all sorts of other subjects where reading text is relevant, which is almost all of them.
Okay, fair enough, I guess. Another question. They don't seem to have included the other half of the story, namely the half of the story that says that boys are better at mathematics.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, the article is not going to be about everything that exists in the universe, so they are going to focus on reading and writing, and that seems reasonable enough. I mean, you can't write an article about everything.
Fair enough. No, the reason I'm saying these things is where I'm trying to get is that is it really so hard to accept that whilst we are teenagers, we as humans develop slightly different depending on our sex. when boys are 15, they tend to be far better than their female colleagues at mathematics, and they tend to be a little bit on the sucky side in terms of reading. And by the time they reach 19 or 20 or 18 or whatever, these sorts of things kind of tend to balance themselves out. Is it really that hard to accept that we just simply develop differently a little bit? Why is that a problem? That's where I'm trying to get.
Yeah, I don't know if the researchers here think that it's a problem. It's just they just believe they've identified some ways in which we might perceive a difference that doesn't actually exist, or that is not as big as we perceive it to be.
Hmm.
And I think it's very legitimate to look at that
Hmm.
and to look at these, because it makes a difference um, whether boys are actually worse at reading, but then they catch up by the time they are 18 or whatever, or whether they are always about on par with girls, and we're just measuring things differently because these tests administered at a younger age are different than the tests administered to adults.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, well, I guess the other way of testing it is to give advertisement, nonfiction or fiction, or no, nonfiction, or what was it the third one, type of texts to girls at the age of 10 and see if they perform similarly with boys or they perform
Yeah.
worse. If they perform worse, then I guess the that would that would simply mean that boys are better with some types of texts and girls are better with other types of texts, which would still be fine.
Yep.
Now, I don't know. On one hand, it is a little bit of a fascinating topic. There is a similar type of argument going on into those interested in IQ measuring. For instance, there is the running assertion that Asians have a slightly East Asians in particular, Chinese, Koreans, Japanese, have a particularly higher IQ than white people. Now, that may indeed be true, but the way it has been established right now is a little bit murky, starting to be called into question for the simple reason that most most individuals have been tested using the progressive Raven matrix, which tests individuals' ability to compose images. Now that's fine, and then it's a very neutral way to measure IQ. The problem is that Koreans, Japanese, they write in pictograms, so they develop the ability to compose images much earlier and much more perniciously than white people who tend to write in Latin alphabet, so they don't need that much of a pictogram skills at the age of 5 or 6 or 10.
Yeah,
So go ahead.
I mean, Koreans don't actually write in pictograms. They also have an alphabet, at least. I mean, they also have this sort of older script that uses like the Chinese characters, but like the script that they nowadays use is basically an alphabet where they have like 50 or something different characters.
Mhm. Yeah, you're correct. But most of the results this hypothesis is based on were collected like in the 80s, where when the pictograms were far more popular. Same in Japan, where the hiragana alphabet was far more popular than it is now. Because now you can't really test some of these things because it's unethical, because it's quote unquote racist, even though testing this would actually question the legitimacy of a quote unquote racist assertion. But anyway, so yeah. But the point I was trying to make is that it is fascinating to watch these kinds of arguments where they question the way the tests are, because sometimes it might be a legitimate point that the
Yep,
test
yep.
produces the kind of results that may not be completely in line with reality, or maybe even completely outside of reality.
Yeah, measuring these sort of things is really tricky. The social sciences are just notoriously fickle, and there's a lot of basically any sort of test, any sort of text test you want to administer, any sort of study, you can basically always question the methodology, because there's always sort of just assumption that you just have to make, because otherwise you just would never get done. It's impossible to just um, like have everything rigorously controlled for, because there's just too many variables. So there's always going to be, any sort of study is going to have some weaknesses. So it's important that we sort of try to keep an open mind and not not sort of rush to condemn or to praise a study if it gives us the results that we want to see. And it's also important that we don't run in with a sort of ideological blinders, and sort of we have this result that this group and this group must be equal, and therefore we're just going to cast doubt on any sort of test that doesn't give us a result, and just unquestionably accept any test that gives us the desired result. That's very dangerous, and I fear that this is something that happens quite a lot in the social sciences,
For sure.
especially when it comes to sort of controversial issues like race and IQ. That's a whole minefield that where there's
Yeah,
a
and to a
lot
lesser
of
extent,
biases coming in, and it's quite difficult.
yeah, and to a lesser extent in the sex field as well. I mean, studying the differences between men and women, uh, it has now started to become a little bit more acceptable. But we do remember the Norwegian TV series called The Brainwashing, Yarnevask, where even asking such questions was considered completely impolite, and you could actually have career problems as a researcher if you would ask these questions. This was in 2005, 2006, when that documentary was made, and many heads of social sciences departments in various universities in Norway were asked these kinds of things, and they were all lashing out at the host of the show. This guy, this comedian, he was a comedian. He was asking very honest questions. He was like, "Why aren't we studying this? What's so wrong about studying it?" And they would all lash out at him, and that he's a misogynist daring to ask such questions. So it's good to see that this study coming from Norway, they're starting to break that particular glass ceiling. Maybe soon enough we can expect similar things with race and IQ, although maybe not that soon enough, because recently Nature came out and said it's unethical to even ask the question, because I don't know why, but but he said it's unethical.
Yeah, basically you have to wait for the Chinese to make genetic research at a bigger scale, because Chinese, they don't really care about that sort of stuff
Yeah.
too much, and so that's has a lot of hope to get some answers from that corner. But
Yeah,
yeah, anyway.
or some Chinese folks coming to Europe, Chinese scientists coming to Europe or to North America and do it. Like that fine chap who stopped the Black Lives Matter march because he went there and said, hey, this is library. And they had to shut the fuck up because they couldn't tell him he's a straight white male, the oppressing whatever. I mean, and he said, "Hey, this is library," in a very very stereotypical Chinese accent. The video, you have to see this video. It's a 1 minute long video on YouTube. Hey, this is library, and then there's just silence. It's 20 seconds of the Black Lives Matter idiots shouting and whatever, and no to fascism, Black Lives Matter, whatever. And this guy comes with a very very soft voice. Hey, and then he shouts louder, and then this is library, and then he turns around and leaves. It's complete silence. So we have to wait for these kinds of brave Chinese men and women to come in and lecture us on this, because we're too cucked to do it ourselves. All right, let's go to the next one.
Okay, the next one is slightly older. It's from Austria, and it's from krone.at. Salzburg, Austrian Students Association embarrasses itself by introducing a gender protocol. The gender police have struck again, but the latest coup is likely to backfire. The red-green student representation of the University of Salzburg wants to document violations against their gender ideology with a Stasi-like meeting protocol. Anyone who, quote, rolls their eyes to this idiocy will be noted down. The latest outgrowth of the linguistic guardians of morality and among the students' university representatives is now causing a lot of mockery. In the future, violations of red-green gender ideology will be documented meticulously with a gender watch protocol at meetings of the Austrian Students Association of Salzburg. For example, when a student rolls their eyes or does not speak in a gender-inclusive way or makes a sexist statement or pointedly writes text messages. This absurd arrangement has now been made public by Paul Oblasser, the head of the students' organization Aktionsgemeinschaft, which is associated with the ÖVP, and the ÖVP is the is a moderate conservative party in Austria, quite a big party. With a mixture of amusement and astonishment, he shared the document on Facebook, where in a short while it elicited dozens of comments full of ridicule. Have you gone full retard? Or, once again, what is actually important to the people in the Students' Association is on full display. Some even doubted the authenticity of the document. Skipping a bit here. This is alarming because the initiators are potential future decision makers. The Students' Association is traditionally considered as a stepping stone to the major parties. Many politicians have earned their early political accomplishments during their studies. In addition, the Students' Association is a legal representative for nearly 300,000 students and is financed through compulsory contributions. With a breakdown by gender in the violations, perceived truth about the culture of debate were to become statistically demonstrable. At a basic level, the Students' Association efforts to better involve women in university politics are in no way objectionable, but this embarrassing protocol would be a big disservice to any reasonable cause.
God help us. I mean, if it is true that this is the organization that fields the future politicians of Austria, may God help Austria. Amazing.
Oh my God, he pointedly wrote a text message.
Amazing. What I was about to say is that speaking in a gender inclusive way means something slightly different in German. It means mutilating all sorts of words. It's not like in English where you just have to include 10 or 15 bogus words and there you go. It is a lot more complicated than that. I remember you explained to me with the difference between student and studierende or something madness with putting capital letters in the middle of the word and things like that.
The studierende is an effort to get sort of a normal word for a gender neutral plural of students. Studierende doesn't have any sort of these capital I's or something like that. It's just sort of grammatically a bit dubious because studierende basically means studying ones instead of students. So it's kind of weird, but that's like one of the less ugly gender words that they've introduced. But there's a lot of words where you can't do this trick of the of this studierende studying ones. You have to there's like various ways of doing it. It's just you could just say something like Bürgerinnen und Bürger, so citizens, so basically female citizens and male citizens. You can say both, or you can say BürgerInnen, and you have sort of this slight stop there. And if you're speaking it or if you're writing it, you put you capitalize the I in Bürgerinnen. That's basically like just the female form, except we're putting like either capitalizing one of the letters within the word, or there's other ways of doing it. There's also we can have like an underscore within the word, or you can have like an asterisk in the word, because that's more trans exclusive or something like that, because you also include like different genders, and it's just the words just they're hideous, and also it's sort of confusing because especially if you're speaking it, because if you say BürgerInnen, it sounds a lot like Bürgerinnen, and you know the first is just all citizens, whereas Bürgerinnen is just female citizens. So there's a lot of potential for misunderstandings there, and because I mean most people are probably not really familiar with these sort of conventions. If they say Bürgerinnen to them, they probably just assume that you've slightly mispronounced Bürgerinnen, and they will misunderstand you. So it's quite horrible.
Yeah. the, if it makes you feel better, this is not exclusive to German. There is in Spain and in the Spanish-speaking countries a similar movement. So, for instance, if you want to say "my dear friends" or "dear friends," the correct way to say is "queridos amigos," but that's apparently to the politically correct in Spain. Amigos is female exclusionary and trans exclusionary, so therefore it's wrong. So their preferred version is the spelling is the pronunciation is amigas, which is actually dear female friends, but the spelling is amig ampersand s. So so I mean, it's not just exclusive to German to put asterisks and underscores and ampersands and all sorts of nasty things in the middle of the words. Uh, on a more serious note, this is absolute lunacy. I mean, uh, I don't think Austrians really do care about. I mean, what from what I know from my few Austrian friends that I have and from my short visits to Austria, they seem to be much less into all of this social justicey thing
Yeah.
than your average British person or your average American person. I mean, in Britain, even though most people don't necessarily agree with social justice, at least they know what it is. Whereas your average Austrian just doesn't know. They don't care. They're like, yeah, whatever.
I mean, they sort of know, but they just think it's mental.
Well, it kind of is. I mean, if we are to be entirely serious with ourselves, it kind of is a mental disorder. I mean, imagine how miserable you would have to be as a human being to spend all your lifetime policing other people for not putting a capital letter in the middle of the word or not having enough stars to avoid being trans exclusionary. I mean, you have to be very miserable as a human being to spend your time on this. Just saying. Just saying.
Yeah, and it's something that is basically used by like politicians and these sorts of organizations, the students' organizations, and so on. Like normal people, or like the vast majority of normal people, don't use this kind of language. Maybe like some sort of like left wing publications do, but like most newspapers also don't use this gender inclusive language. They just, if it's like a plural form, they just use the male form because that's just what you do, and that's what people have done for centuries, and it's always meant it's always meant both sexes if it's a plural form, unless you like specify otherwise. Yeah, it's something that organizations like this, this in German, this organization actually is called the Österreichische Hochschule Innenschaft, so Hochschule and underscore Innenschaft. Yeah, it's quite strange.
Yeah, it is, and the purpose of language is to make yourself understood. If you keep adding all sorts of bullshit rules, you're gonna stop making yourself understood. And now I'm not saying all languages should be like Latin, which is basically the same for the last 2,000 years, which is why anyone learning Latin today can read 900 years old documents in the Vatican, because it will definitely be the same. Now, I'm not saying it should be that conservative.
I mean, even Latin has changed quite a bit over
A little
the
bit,
centuries.
Yeah, a
I
little
mean,
bit, but
the thing is that most people learn in Latin today, they learn classical Latin, so they learn the Latin spoken 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, but nevertheless, I mean, documents redacted or written in Latin today, would definitely be easy to understand for someone 900 years ago.
Yeah.
or 1,000 years ago. Now, I'm not saying all languages should follow the same highly conservative pattern, but nevertheless, I mean, and on one moment, you'd have to ask yourselves, you'd have to ask yourself, do we really understand what people used to say 50 years ago or 100 years ago? And if you don't, maybe you should ask yourself why the hell the language did change that fast and that much. And today is definitely not a problem, but if this trend continues for another 20 or 30 years, by the time I will reach age 80 myself, considering that I might live that long, probably not, but never. Anyway, if I happen to live by the age of 80, I might be under the situation where I would need a translator for the same for the same thing. Uh, for instance, by the time I'm 80, probably the English I speak now would be quite incomprehensible for the 15-year-olds of those times, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and it's definitely going to be very offensive.
Oh, definitely going to be very offensive. Yeah, for sure. For sure. It already is. I mean, consider this. I learned English from a book in which saying Negro was still acceptable. So, and I'm not really that old, so it already is. But yeah. All right, let's go to the next one. The next one is from the State Press Trust in Norway, the NRK. Leading lawyer, more will be sentenced in rape cases without a jury. Research has shown that many rape cases where there has been a conviction in the lower court have ended up in acquittal in the high court where the jury is being used, says counsel Hege Solomon. In 2007, a working group appointed by the Attorney General found that more than half of rape sentences in lower courts end up in acquittal in the jury in the High Court. Opposition to the jury system has been mounting for a long time. On Thursday, it became clear that there is a majority in the parliament for the current jury system to be terminated. This removes the scheme where a jury of people decides the cases that are appealed from the district court. In the new scheme, the cases in the Court of Appeal are decided by a panel with five junior judges and two professional judges, or lay judges, whatever. When you remove the jury system, I believe it will strengthen the legal protection for victims of rape because I think it will lead to more convictions in the High Court, says counsel Hege Solomon. The group of attorneys sat down in 2007 and investigated 99 rape cases that went to the Court of Appeal between 2003 and 2005. These were cases where the defendant had been convicted in a district court, but the Court of Appeal acquitted 55% of those defendants. The district court has professional judges with decisive influence on the question of guilt. In the Court of Appeal, the question of guilt is decided by a jury. The defense attorneys group in the Bar Association is critical of the termination of the jury system. They believe acquittals in the Court of Appeal shows that the jury imposes a much stricter standard of evidence than professional judges. One must investigate better. One must bring the matter better in court, not have the assessment of evidence in court be left only to the judges because we don't like the outcome. This proposal here aims to make some structural changes in courts to get more convictions. It is a form of gerrymandering, says Marius Dietrichson, leader of the defense attorneys group. The jury will decide today the question of guilt by anonymous voting without interference from the judges. And it doesn't have to justify its decision. With the new professional justice system, the issue of guilt would be determined jointly by two professional judges and three junior judges or lay judges. The judgment would also have to be explained. So here we have an interesting case. Basically, this jury system in the sort of a Supreme Court in Norway has been around. It hasn't been around forever, but it has been around for a few decades now. And it's one of the few places outside the Anglosphere where the idea of a jury is somewhat entertained. But in most cases, if you end up in a Norwegian court, it looks pretty much like any other court in continental Europe, in Germany, in Hungary, you name it. But here it is, a very interesting case of basically a dispute between an Anglo type of judiciary and a Roman/continental European type of judiciary. I don't think there is a correct answer to this.
Yeah, I'm also not sure which system is better here, but this sort of attitude that the system isn't working because you're not getting enough convictions. It's in a vacuum. That just seems insane to me. Um, you can say it's not working because here are these cases where people were pretty clearly guilty and they got off. That might be an argument, but just saying we don't get enough rape convictions, that's just ludicrous. That's not an argument.
Yes, and besides, the argument is mostly to end the jury system in rape cases. So they don't want to end it in the murder cases, or in robbery cases, or in armed robbery, or in any other cases. Particularly with rape, which tells me there is feminist influence there. There is genderist ideology somewhere along the line of this decision, which hasn't been made yet, and hopefully the parliament will wisen up to this nonsense and vote it down. But nevertheless, I mean, if you are to drop the jury system, I don't know, drop it entirely, not just pick and choose. I mean, I kind of agree with Marius Dietrich, who says that Dietrichson, who says that, well, this is a form of gerrymandering. We're dropping the jury system here in the cases of rape because we don't like the results, but we keep them in the cases of murder because we like the results there. I mean, come on.
Yeah, that seems very fishy. Maybe it really is the case that they've just they've been able or they've been more successful at spreading feminist ideology among judges and among the general public. So they think that just they're going to get more convictions that way because of that reason. I don't know.
Yeah, and also what we don't know, and one of the reasons we don't know is that because there is no way to find out, is whether the judges who then applied the acquittals in those cases agreed with the jury or not. We don't know that. So it could very well be the case that even without a jury, it would have still ended up in 55% acquittals.
Yep.
I mean, there is no guarantee that just because you take the jury out, the judges will suddenly all become militant feminists and convict 100% of the time. It's just not how how the reality tends to work. But on a more philosophical level, I don't think that this is a question that we can ever correctly answer. Is it better to have juries? Is it better to have a panel of judges or a mixed panel of judges in this case to determine guilt? I don't know. I don't know. In some cases, it would seem that the jury is better. In other cases, it would seem that professional judges are probably better. But it
Yeah,
all
there's
kind
definitely
of
arguments on both sides there.
yeah, at the end of the day, it kind of does depend of the kind of populace do you have. I mean, if you have a populace that tends to be, let's face it, kind of stupid, then maybe it's better to have professional judges. If you have, however, a populace that tends to be kind of commonsensical in the sense of fairly reasonable people, then maybe a jury would be better off. I mean, one of the reasons why this tended to work for a while in the United States is because you had a majority of the populace who believed that sometimes the law is not perfect, so therefore sometimes in this particular case, for instance, the law is probably too extreme, so we're gonna acquit. You would have people who would be able to do these kinds of arguments, even in smaller towns. It could be, it was a reasonable thing that the jury of one's peers, but it's no longer working now because you no longer have a population that is so unified in its value system. So one's peers could mean anything, and it's not really one's peers from one point on. I mean, think about it in a huge city like New York or Madrid. A jury of your peers is not really your peers. I mean, unless they're from your neighborhood, it's not really your peers. Because there's so many subcultures and very different sectors within the same huge metropolis. So in that regard, I don't know, maybe a professional judge would be better. In the case of juries, it only works if you don't have a divided population, especially a very divided one.
Yeah, and the thing with the jury trial is that you have basically you have this jury that is kind of sort of at least partly outside the law, that they can actually not just decide about what are the legal facts of the case, but also to some degree what the law should be, because you can just vote to acquit someone, for example, even if technically he's guilty.
Yes.
which has good and bad consequences. You can sort of in this way nullify an unjust law, but you can also nullify a just law. So in the American case, in a lot of cases in the American South, you could say whites could get away with murder if they murdered black people, lynched them, because white jurymen were not willing to convict them. So that's definitely a very bad thing that can happen with the jury. But you can also nullify all sorts of unjust laws. So it's difficult to say which system is better. There's a lot of advantages and disadvantages that you would have to weigh, and whether it's in the case of rape, but that's better or not to have the jury system, I don't quite know. But to sort of say that selectively that we're going to have it here but not there, that just seems quite suspicious to me.
Mm. Uh, to be fair, if I'm to express a clear preference, probably in the cases of rape, it's better to have them. And the reason I'm saying this is because we're living in and we, as in anyone in Europe and North America for sure, we're living in an age where we have increasingly insane policies and legislation that makes everything rape. So a bit of weighing in from the commonsensical person, the common person living uh, outside of this lunacy asylum that is our parliaments and our courts, some sort of weighing in there might actually help. I mean, for instance, I don't think a jury anywhere in Europe actually would convict on an issue like the case we had last week with oh my God, he took down his condom, therefore rape. I think
Yeah.
a jury would say that's ludicrous, not guilty, get the fuck out. Try a better charge. Try fraud, and maybe we'll may have a discussion about that. But rape, get out. So if I am to express a clear preference, I think in particularly in cases of rape, a trial by jury is somewhat preferable, considering the current circumstances that are now when we have so many insane laws and policies, and it's still better in Norway and in most of Europe. There are places in this world where they have the so-called rape shield laws, where the jury is intentionally precluded from learning relevant details and sometimes exculpatory details. Uh, and in those cases, I don't know, if I were a juror, I would say, yeah, I'm not guilty. I don't care. You prevented me from even learning all the facts. So why should I trust anything you say to the prosecutor?
Yeah, though it of course very much this sort of commonsensical notion of justice depends on the jurors actually having common sense. That's not something that can necessarily be taken for granted because, like for example, like today or yesterday, I read a story from America where some girl in school was prevented by her teacher from going to the bathroom, and the teacher told her that she is not allowed to leave the classroom, but if she really had to pee, she could pee in a bucket in some like storage closet, and which she then did, and from then on, all her classmates would tease her about that, and she had a horrible time of it, and they sued the school and for $25,000 in damages or reparation or whatever. But then the jurors actually decided to award them $1.25 million, which is, I mean, that's just insane. I mean,
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
what the teacher did, of course, was clearly unjustified. It clearly was a violation of the girl's dignity, and should get some sort of compensation for that. But $1.25 million for peeing in a bucket? Sorry, but that's just unreasonable.
Yeah, well, in fairness, $25,000 is too little, but yeah, 1.25 million get lost. That's just insane. I completely agree. Now, of course, it does. The whole notion is predicated upon a populace that has some sort of common sense, which is why I'm saying that it is no longer working today in America because. because the population is very divided and no longer so unified in values, and also because, let's face it, Americans have this litigation culture. They would sue anyone for anything. I mean, again, this is coming from someone who really loves America. I mean, I really do. But there are aspects of the American culture that kind of do suck. This litigation culture being one aspect about it. Um, Recently I was helping an American immigrant here to arrange an office space, and he came in and asked me, "Is it okay if we put the smoking area there?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" Well, wouldn't the neighbors sue us for because it's too close to them? And I'm like, no. And even if they wanted to, they can't, because you can't sue for nonsensical issues here. I mean, it is my property. Smoking is still legal in this country. Fuck off. I mean, come on. Seriously, it's not in your house. So, really? But this litigation culture is indeed an issue. With that said, I still think that, especially in the cases of rape, um, I think even the most divided populations can still field juries that can uh, real can apply some sort of common sense, because everyone has sex, everyone has been a teenager, everyone has had at least once some rough sex. Well, except the feminist autistic manginas, but except those, everyone has had the rough sex at least once, and can sort of empathize both with the accused and with the alleged victim, and can assess things on a bit more of an empathetic level, without using highly ideological biases like a smile 2 seconds too much is rape, which tends to be the ideological biases applied to our policies lately. So in that sort of fashion, I was imagining. But yeah, you're right.
Of course, it depends a lot on the sex of the smiler and the smiley.
For sure, and not just that, but the the attractiveness of the one doing the smiling. I mean, if it's Brad Pitt, then it's very nice smiling. If it's the homeless dude from the subway, it's creepy. So yeah. All right. Now, this is a very good segue towards our last one, which is not from Europe, but it's the kind of case that we've covered in the past on this show, and it's a very good discussion generating piece coming from the Reason magazine, which is a place that I absolutely loathe, but they usually get it right on these kinds of stories. The state has stopped trying to wreck a teenage boy's life because he sexted his girlfriend. For now. Austin Yabandith just turned 18, but he's not allowed to see his friends, stay out past 9 p.m., use a computer, or even attend school. The Superior, Wisconsin, Superior is the town, the Superior, Wisconsin teen was charged with sexual exploitation for exchanging explicit pictures with his underage girlfriend last summer. Thanks to a plea agreement in December, he will avoid prison time and the sex offender registry as conditions of his plea agreement, but life has still been difficult for Austin. According to the conditions of his probation, which are listed on a document given to him by the Wisconsin Department of Corrections, ordinary teen activities are almost entirely off the table. The document dictating those terms is titled Standard Sex Offender Rules, even though Austin was not convicted of a felony and does not have to register as a sex offender. If that sounds unfair, consider this. Austin initially discovered he also wouldn't be able to finish his senior year and graduate high school. Thankfully, that problem has been solved. The additional trouble stemmed from the fact that Austin had transferred schools. He was recently attending school over state lines in Minnesota. The sex offender registry works differently in every state, and even though Wisconsin did not convict Austin of a felony, the misdemeanor charge is enough to get him labeled a sex offender in Minnesota, but not Wisconsin. If that doesn't make sense, that's fine. Readers will recall that Austin was arrested last July by the school research officer, essentially a cop stationed at his school full-time, at his previous school, Superior High in Wisconsin, after it was discovered that the teen had said and received sex from his girlfriend, Kim, which is not her real name. Austin and Kim dated for more than a year, were engaged in a consensual sexual relationship and had the blessing of Kim's parents. They even supplied the couple with birth control. At the time, Kim was 15 and Austin was 17. Unbeknownst to Austin, Kim sent additional nude pictures of herself to other boys at the school. School officials eventually learned that students were sexting each other, and the school resource officer, Tom Johnson, leaped into action. He interviewed several of the boys and confiscated their phones. In the course of his investigation, he spoke with Austin as well. Officer Johnson asked if he could see Austin's phone, and Austin agreed, to his eternal regret. The other boys, the ones really, a Reason magazine needs an editor. The other boys, the ones who had shared Kim's pictures and actually engaged in wrongdoing, were only 16 years old, which meant they weren't worth prosecuting. But Austin was 17, and 17-year-olds can be charged as adults according to Wisconsin law. He was charged with possession of child pornography, sexual assault of a child, and sexual exploitation. In the eyes of the law, Austin's consensual relationship with his high school sweetheart was no different than a 50-year-old having sex with a 15-year-old. Austin faced possible, though unlikely, sentence of 40 years in prison. That's the bad news. Now for the better news. Thanks in part to the public attention generated by Reason's previous reporting on the case, Austin's mother was able to raise enough money to hire a lawyer who specializes in these kinds of cases. That lawyer, Robin Shellow, negotiated a plea deal that would prevent Austin from having to register as a sex offender or spend any additional time in jail. This might not have been possible without the involvement of the DKT Liberty Project, an advocacy organization that promotes individual liberty. After learning about Austin's situations in the pages of Reason, the DKT Liberty Project agreed to pay his attorney fees. While the avoidance of a jail sentence was a major relief for Austin and his mother, they were disappointed in the outcome, given that a misdemeanor conviction could still ruin Austin's life. And he was being treated like a sex offender anyway. He faced significant lifestyle restrictions that left him little choice but to sit at home wondering if he could ever go back to school. Since even the misdemeanor would prevent him from completing high school, Shellow asked the judge to vacate Austin's conviction. On Tuesday, the judge agreed, which means Austin can go back to school as a free man. Still, his ordeal isn't over. After Austin finishes school, the court will re-sentence him in accordance with the misdemeanor conviction. In essence, Austin has been granted a reprieve to make it more convenient for him to go to school, and he's no longer facing felony charges as long as he stays out of trouble for a while. Presumably, however, the court will reimpose probation on him after he finishes out the school year. Instead, prosecutors should drop the case entirely. Austin isn't a threat to society or to children. He is the one in danger of being branded a sex offender for engaging in perfectly normal teen behavior. The authorities in this case have shown a willingness to be practical and consider what's best for Austin. But doing what's really best for Austin means going one step further, that is, dropping the case entirely. So, let's piss off all the people.
All the people?
Well, we sort of do piss off a lot of people when we start sharing our oppressive European perspective, which is to say that age of consent laws set at 17 are radically insane, and we in Europe do these things much more maturely and much more in an adult fashion. I mean, this case would simply not be possible in almost all of Europe. It would just never happen.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, 17-year-olds have sex with 15-year-olds, but it's legally to do that in Europe.
Yeah, and it's just perfectly normal behavior. There's no one's actually getting hurt. It's just completely insane to criminalize this sort of behavior.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, and these kinds of cases have another problem in addition to the dubious morality on which they were judged, because these laws they do have a certain type of values behind them, and those values aren't actually traditional American values, believe it or not. They're rather new on a historical scale. They're less than 100 years old, and they're based on the temperance movement. Now, for those of you who don't know what the temperance movement is what happens when legitimate fascists meet feminists, and then they unite and start advocating for shit. I'm not joking. The temperance movement was the union of fascist women and feminist women. And they had a set of demands. One of them was raising the age of consent laws to absurd levels as a shorthand to banning child prostitution. Instead of banning child prostitution, they banned normal behavior for virtually all teenagers. And in addition to that, they also demanded bans on prostitution, bans on pornography, a lot of bans, because, fascists and feminists, of course, they're going to demand banning shit. In a more serious note, uh, the morality on which these laws were written is dubious in itself, but also they were written in a very, very different context. That is to say, in a context when breaking them would be in and of itself difficult. I mean, when when the judge when this kid's mother was 15, uh, even making a naked picture of herself would have been quite difficult. Sharing it to the entire school would have been even more difficult, not to mention costly. I mean, you would have to actually take the picture and then somehow develop it without anyone knowing, because anyone helping you would have been a criminal anyway, and then somehow sharing it physically to every single individual. That's quite complicated. I mean, they were written in contexts where breaking it would have been quite difficult. But now every single teenager, even in poor countries, has a camera in his or her pocket. So pictures of all sorts, including, yes, naked pictures, are much easier not only to make but also to spread. So this is a very, very dangerous trend. If these kinds of laws aren't somehow amended, we're going to have entire generations of teenage criminals. We're just going to have to.
Yeah, and it's just insane that you have this 15-year-old girl taking a naked picture of herself, then sending it to some boy, and then the boy is guilty of possessing child pornography. I mean, the purpose of, or the only sort of legitimate purpose for making child pornography illegal is to exploit to stop the exploitation of children in making these pornographic images or films or whatever. Um, no one was actually harmed in making that picture. The girl did it to herself. She wanted to take the picture. She wanted others to see the picture. She is not the injured party here.
Yeah,
There is no injured party.
there
The
is no.
only
Yeah,
injured party is a sense of propriety, maybe, but that shouldn't it shouldn't be illegal to to disturb people's sense of propriety um, and prudery and whatever.
yeah. Also, I remember there is I think it is the Eighth Amendment, which says that there shouldn't be cruel and unusual punishment. I think it is the Eighth Amendment. Um, well, not being allowed to see your friends and not being allowed to stay out past 9 p.m. or use a computer, that's in my book cruel and unusual punishment for a 17-year-old, or anyway, live recently 18-year-old. I mean, come on, you gotta be fucking kidding me.
Yeah, and it is the Eighth Amendment. Just looked it up.
Yeah. Well, see, I'm very good in my American jurisprudence. No, I'm not joking. I seriously am. But in all seriousness, I think this is cruel and unusual punishment, especially not even allowing him to go to school. I mean, really, on one hand, you bemoan as a society that people are dropping out high school. There's, oh my God, there's too many uneducated people and whatnot. On the other hand, you don't let them to go to school because their girlfriend took a picture of herself and sent it to him. What? How do these things even add up? I mean, how is this reasonable? Because I'm thinking, I mean, all of these things are possible because a number of people, that is the first police officer, another two police officers who decided to send it to the DA, then the DA and the judge. I mean, there are at least five people thought this is reasonable.
Yeah, and nothing about this case is in any way reasonable. Like nothing that the boy did was even in any way immoral,
Oh, of
let
course
alone
not.
illegal, or let alone that it should be illegal. And just because something is immoral is not that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be illegal. Lots of things that I would consider immoral that should nevertheless be legal. So being illegal is a much higher bar that has to be cleared, and this doesn't even clear the bar of immorality, and therefore this kind of law is just barbarous, and it's just an embarrassment that America still has these kinds of laws.
Well, it's more of an embarrassment that they're still rigorously enforced rather than that they still have them. I mean, there's many legacy laws in many U.S. states that just nobody even bothered to abolish them, even though they've been abolished by practice decades ago, or some of them even over 100 years ago. The embarrassment is that they're still being enforced. I mean, in England, it's still illegal to go with a crossbow inside the walls of a citadel. Now there are no walls and citadels anymore, and nobody uses crossbows, but the law is still there. But presumably, if you have a crossbow competition inside of a city, I don't think anyone would arrest you based on that 15th century laws. So the embarrassment is that it's still being used, still being enforced so rigorously. In somewhere in the comment section of this article, I love comment sections. I really do. I read comment sections of every article, and I hate publications who don't have comment sections. One of the commenters of this article said that maybe the judiciary should look at the resource officer, Tom Johnson, who leapt into action. I mean, he wanted to review the evidence at length, and then went with all of those confiscated phones and took it to his colleagues at the precincts, who all of them reviewed the evidence at length, and then decided to send
And reviewed them in a locked room, presumably.
in the locker room for sure, yeah. And then decided to pursue the case, and then sent it to the district attorney and his team, and then all of those reviewed the evidence at length. And then all of them with a smiley face on their dirty faces went to the judge and said, "Judge, please review this evidence." And then the judge reviewed the evidence at length. Maybe the problem is with those people rather than and then when after they've all reviewed the evidence at length and smiled, they said nobody should ever be able to enjoy this the way we did. So therefore, gonna send this kid to jail because he dared to enjoy it first before we got to. I mean, seriously, this is just insane. I mean, it really is. I don't know. I mean. I know it is hard, and especially whenever I say these things, I don't get into trouble with Europeans, but I always get into trouble with Americans when I say this, and sometimes with Brits, but very rare. But almost always with Americans. But nevertheless, it is normal and has always been normal, at least for the last I don't know 10,000 years of human history, that 15-year-olds want to have sex, and they will, and they do frequently. And they usually have sex within their age bracket. That is, with 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, maybe 19, but not more. Rarely more. This has been the case since forever. And until very recently, it usually was the case that by the time a girl was 16 or 17, she would already have one child. These kinds of things aren't going to change anytime soon, if ever, and they're definitely not going to be changed by a temperance movement era type of law. I mean, and this is my problem with many conservatives who worship at the altar of the law and say, well, he should have known better because it's the law, therefore it's illegal. No, fuck the law. If the law is unjust, I think abiding by it is madness, and especially upholding it is madness.
Yeah, I mean, to abide by the law may just be prudence, even if you don't agree with it. But to uphold it, to enforce it, that definitely should be done. Yeah, I'm even going to go one step further and say that in this article they say that there's a difference if a 17-year-old is having sex with a 15-year-old, or if it's a 50-year-old having sex with a 15-year-old. I'm not even sure that the latter should be illegal. I'm not even sure that it should be legal for a 50-year-old to have sex with a 15-year-old.
It's not illegal here. Yeah. Just saying.
It is illegal in Germany, but it would be legal. It would be legal with a 16-year-old. So I'm not. It's like obviously there should be some sort of limit, and it's not clear to me what the limit should be. But at least it's not obvious that 15 is too young to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Switzerland, Hungary, and Italy have ages of consent of 14. Spain used to be the lowest with 13, and I think they changed it last year. And they raised it. I think it was at 15. They raised it. Um, I don't know what the China is at 14. And there is no correlation. I mean, whenever I say these kinds of things, I usually get this kind of thing. Oh well, if you make it lower, then you will encourage teenage sex. I don't know if that's true. China, for instance, has an age of consent of 14, yet the average age at which people start their sex lives is like 19 for girls and 20 for boys or for men. Um, so it's not necessarily a direct correlation. I don't know what the correct answer is, but as far as I'm concerned, as long as it's higher than 13 and lower than 17, is closer to mental sanity. I mean, lower than 13 is probably degenerate. 17 is way too high. 15, 14, somewhere around there, it should be probably it's probably the sweet spot. Uh, there are very a few people who voluntarily start their sex lives earlier than 14, but also a significant minority of teenagers start their sex lives long before the age of 17. I mean, it just is a fact. And probably even a majority, but definitely a significant minority.
Yeah, and it's important to keep in mind that the question is not at what age is it appropriate to
Hmm.
begin having sex, or at what age is it
Very true.
desirable to begin having sex. The question is, at what age is having sex so obviously a bad idea that we should use violence to prevent it? Because
Hmm.
that's what making it illegal does.
Hmm.
We're using
Yes.
violence to lock up people who violate these age of consent laws, and
Hmm.
we better make damn sure that pretty much all the people who have sex under this age are going to be harmed by it, because otherwise you're preventing lots of um, people from having consensual sex, and you're locking up lots of people for having consensual sex,
Hmm.
and that's an abomination.
Hmm. Hmm. And there is the crowd that argues for exceptions, such as is the case in Germany, where I think if one of the partners is at 21 or 20,
I think
uh,
it's 25. I'm not entirely sure. Then it's if it's
then
like
the age of consent is
one is
14.
then it's 14. Yeah, and
Yeah.
otherwise it's 16.
Hmm. Hmm. That's still somewhat better than having a one size fits it all. Although, again, I would argue for a universal one. I don't know. I mean, in America, in the American jurisprudence, this is called the Romeo and Juliet laws,
Yep.
which basically allow 14, 15-year olds, 13-year olds sometimes. Here, CYR says in the chat room, Tennessee has an age of consent of 18, but close of age exceptions. So 13, 17, 13-year olds with 17-year olds would be legal. These are the textbook Romeo and Juliet type of laws. That would still be a more acceptable trade-off than having very, very high ages of consent and putting people on the sex offenders registry for nothing. I mean, I used to be in favor of these kinds of policies, the sex offender registry, but then I learned how it actually works in practice, and then I changed my mind because I would have no problem with the sex offenders registry if it would be used against pedophiles. But then when I learned that there were a lot of people there guilty of peeing behind the dumpster, and some woman saw him, and she was offended by it. There are also people there like this poor young lad who just had sex with his high school sweetheart. I mean, when I learned how it works in practice, I changed my mind on the sex offenders registry type of legislation, and I don't know. I guess it's just the nature of the beast. Once a law is on the books, it tends to get the worst out of it over time. Not immediately, but in a generation or two.
I think it's quite funny that they call these exceptions Romeo and Juliet laws, because in the play Juliet is actually 13 years old.
Yes.
Um, and we don't actually know how old Romeo is. Presumably quite a bit older. We don't know though. So that's actually quite funny, because no Americans supposedly should be horrified at this at Romeo and Juliet, but somehow they're not, because apparently they somehow just realized that you know 13-year-olds having sort of, at least I don't think they actually have sex in It's not, I think, implied in the play, but she's like so madly in love that she kills herself. Apparently, that's normal behavior for a 13-year-old girl, but having a sex at age 17, no, that's just crazy.
Yeah. As you said earlier, it's not a question on when it is moral or okay or desirable to start having sex. I mean, um, but yeah, I mean, I don't know how to put it. Technically, for instance, I myself was raped. When I back in those days, the age of consent here was 14. Now it's 15, and I was a month below the age of consent. So I could claim being a historically oppressed victim. In reality, if I were to be again at that age, I would do it all over again, no regrets. I guess the problem this problem becomes more absurd in Anglo type of nations, because there the notion of the spirit of the law is never taken into question. It's always the letter of the law. The law says this, therefore this. It's never allowed too much interpretation, and especially in these juvenile cases where there is no jury, the judge can do pretty much whatever he wants, uh, and that tends to create a problem. I mean, I remember there was a recent case here with it was the same thing. It was the girl was 14 and the guy was 15, and she got pregnant. And according to the law, he was a rapist who should have been sent to jail. But the judge was like, no, it's just not going to happen, and basically muddled the case and eventually left them both alone. And this is something that you can do in a Roman type of law, but in common law, it seems that it's in practice impossible. Although in theory it could be possible. I mean, the judge could still say, "Well, this is madness," but in
Or the
practice, you
jurors
just
could.
can't. Hmm?
Or
Or
the
the jury
jurors
could,
could.
if it is not a juvenile type of case. If it's a juvenile type of case, sometimes they don't allow juries. I don't know in this particular case how it went, but in juvenile cases they sometimes don't even allow juries, which is very interesting. That means you can charge a 16 or a 17-year-old as an adult, and so therefore he has all the responsibilities of the law but not all legal rights of the law. It's very interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just madness. But back to the sexting thingy, and then we can wrap this up. The thing with these sexting thingies is that they're not going to become they're not going to happen rarer. They're going to happen much more often, and something will have to be done with these laws and policies. I don't want to believe that we're heading into a world where every teenager could be a criminal.
Yeah, and this sort of thing is really dangerous, because if you make everyone a criminal, then of course you're not going to lock up everyone, but that means you can lock up anyone,
Yeah,
and that is very dangerous.
yeah, it creates this environment of selective enforcement, like this particular case. I mean, it says here in the article that there were more offenders, not just this particular kid, Austin Yabandit. There were several others, but because those were several months younger than him, therefore they were 16, they were not worth pursuing, so they left those ones alone, but they pursued this guy because he was 17 and 2 months, and uh, therefore fair game. I mean, how does this work? I mean, do the hormones of a teenager are less dangerous when the teenager is 16 years and 5 months, and there's suddenly a huge danger when the same teenager is 17 years and 1 month? I mean, this is the kind of lunacy that should be avoided.
Yeah.
All right, I think we pissed off enough people. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we pissed off several people, and I don't know if I care that much. Somehow these kinds of things need reform, and if nobody dares to talk, and I understand why many people avoid speaking about this topic, which is why I'm taking it upon myself, because I spoke about so many incorrect things, politically incorrect things, that it doesn't really matter anymore. And I understand why many people avoid speaking about these things, because you risk of being associated with those disgusting left-wing fucktards at Salon who are legitimately engaged in pedo advocacy, and nobody wants to be associated with those guys. And I perfectly understand the shyness about talking about these things, because you don't want to be associated with those scumbags.
Yep.
But nevertheless, I mean, arguing for an age of consent of 15 or 14, and sorting out these policies that end up locking up innocent teenagers, I don't think that's pedo advocacy. I think that's very, very commonsensical. And it's actually, if you want to think about it, it's actually a conservative argument. You're arguing for laws that predate feminism, basically, for predate feminist advocacy. Because it was, most of the times it was feminists, at least in the United States. In Europe, it was actually the other way around. The feminists were engaging in pedo advocacy. Yes, I'm looking at you, Simone de Beauvoir. Fucking cunt. Yeah.
Yeah. Also in Germany, very much the Green Party. Lots of pedo advocacy there in the
Oh my
80s.
God, yes. Yes, you're right. For those of you not knowing, please Google Green Party Germany pedophilia Spiegel, and there is an Spiegel. It's a German newspaper, but it has articles in English. It's a four-part article, a series of articles documenting the history of pedo advocacy of the Green Party in Germany. Very, very disturbing read, but I'm sure there are many people who study this. So yeah. With that said, I kind of ran out of things to say.
I have one last thing to say, which is a recommendation to take the red pill. Goodbye.
Take the red pill. Goodbye, everyone. See you next week.